The ceiling was too beautiful to belong to someone who had just died. That was the first thought that crossed his mind, not where am I, not how is this possible, not even the very reasonable panic of a person who had been alive one moment and now appeared to be something else entirely. No. The first thing Xiao Lian noticed was the ceiling. It was carved wood painted in deep red and gold, with tiny cranes frozen mid-flight between curling clouds, and it was so breathtakingly detailed that he lay there staring at it for a full minute before his brain caught up with the rest of him and began screaming. He sat up fast. Too fast. The world tilted sideways and he grabbed at the nearest thing, which turned out to be a silk bed curtain the color of pale lavender, and he clutched it like it was the only real thing left in existence while his eyes swept the room around him in rapid, desperate circles. The room was large. Larger than any bedroom he had ever slept in during his actual life. The one where he had been an ordinary 22-year-old university student who read web novels on his phone at 2 in the morning and ate instant noodles 4 nights a week. That life had not contained carved ceilings or furniture made from dark polished rosewood or shelves lined with silk-wrapped scrolls or a window the size of a door that looked out onto a courtyard full of white plum trees in quiet bloom. That life had contained a bus. And a rain-slicked road. And headlights coming from the wrong direction at the wrong moment. He pressed his palm against his chest and felt his heartbeat real, quick, present and breathed. He was not dead. Or perhaps more accurately, he was not nothing. He was here, wherever here was, inside a body that felt like his and did not feel like his at the same time. The hands he held up in front of his face were slender and pale, the knuckles smooth, the fingers long and fine. Not his university hands, the ones rough from carrying stacked library books and calloused on the right thumb from too many hours gripping a pen. These hands looked like they had been drawn carefully by someone who wanted them to be pretty. He swung his legs off the bed. They were bare and the floor when he touched it was cold polished wood. He stood slowly this time and crossed the room on unsteady feet until he reached the tall bronze mirror standing near the window. The face that looked back at him did not belong to a 22-year-old university student who had ever eaten instant noodles in his life. It was a young face. 19 maybe, with wide dark eyes that held a kind of gentle softness around the edges, and a mouth that seemed to rest in a quiet almost smile even now, even while its owner was in the middle of a complete and silent crisis. The hair was black and loose, falling past the jaw, slightly mussed from sleep. The jawline was soft. The cheekbones were high. The overall impression was of someone who had been assembled specifically to appear harmless and sweet. He knew this face. He knew this face the way he knew the plot of a story he had read 3 times in a row because it had kept him up until sunrise on 3 separate occasions. He knew this face from a character profile illustration posted in the comments section of Chapter 47 of the web novel Crimson Throne, which he had been following online for 8 months before his very inconvenient death. This was Xiao Lian, the villain's little brother. A side character. A background fixture. A person who existed in the story mainly to look gentle and trusting while the real plot happened around him, and who eventually, in Chapter 89, was used as a sacrifice by his own older brother without ever understanding why. He, the 22-year-old former university student currently standing inside that character's body, understood, with sudden and absolute clarity, exactly how much trouble he was in. He sat down on the floor because his legs stopped cooperating. The world of Crimson Throne was a historical fantasy world that ran on politics, betrayal, bloodlines, and an elaborate cultivation system that let skilled fighters channel spiritual energy through their bodies to do extraordinary things. The story followed Jin Kai, a young man from a modest background who entered the Royal Academy on a scholarship of merit and slowly uncovered a massive conspiracy to overthrow the emperor from within. The villain of that story was Xiao Ren, eldest son of the Xiao noble family, brilliant and beautiful and rotten straight through to the center, who had spent years weaving a web of forged documents, planted evidence, and bought loyalty designed to bring the imperial throne to its knees and seat himself in the shadows behind it. And Xiao Lian's sweet, quiet, completely oblivious Xiao Lian was the younger brother of that villain. He appeared in scenes mostly to hand his brother tea, to smile politely at other nobles, and to demonstrate, by contrast, that not everyone in the Xiao family was irredeemably terrible. He was not a fighter. He had no grand cultivation talent. He was just a soft person in a sharp world, and the story treated him accordingly, gently, briefly, and ultimately without mercy when Xiao Ren needed someone to take the fall for a forged letter sent to a rebel lord. He sat on the cold floor of the bedroom that belonged to that soft person and thought very carefully. He knew the plot. Every chapter. Every betrayal. Every hidden motive and carefully laid trap and moment where the story shifted from political drama into something more brutal. He knew that 6 months from now, Xiao Lian would forge a letter in his little brother's handwriting and use it to create the appearance that the hero Zheng Kai was in secret communication with rebel forces. He knew that Lian in the original story never suspected a thing, went cheerfully about his days, trusted his brother completely, smiled at the right people and stayed quiet at the right moments until one morning the Imperial Guard arrived at the academy and he was taken away in silence and never heard from again. He was not going to let that happen. He was not, and he felt this with a ferocity that surprised him, given that he had been in this body for approximately 15 minutes going to be a pawn. Not in someone else's story and not in his brother's plan and not in any version of a narrative that ended with him disappearing quietly from the pages like a footnote. The question was how. He did not have cultivation talent. He did not have weapons training or military allies or a secret inheritance or any of the convenient plot devices that usually saved characters in this genre. What he had was knowledge, complete, detailed, chapter-by-chapter knowledge of everything that was going to happen, and he had the sense to understand that knowledge used carefully was more powerful than almost anything else. He got up from the floor. He straightened the robe he was wearing, pale blue silk with white embroidery at the cuffs and collar, soft and expensive and exactly the kind of thing a cherished younger brother of a noble family would wear, and he looked at his reflection again, this time with intention instead of shock. Xiao Lian, 19 years old. Younger brother of Xiao Lian, currently enrolled at the Royal Academy as a student of classical arts and music, with no official cultivation track. Beloved in the way that decorative things are beloved, noticed when present, forgotten when absent. That was the role the story had written for him. He was going to use every single part of it. The Royal Academy was a walled city inside a city, its courtyards and training grounds and study halls arranged around a central tower that students called the Spine because of the way it rose straight and sharp against the sky. It housed the children of nobles, the children of decorated military families, and the rare commoner scholars who earned their place through examination, and it was, more than anything, a place where alliances were formed and futures were decided, often by people who were barely old enough to be called adults. He arrived that morning, which was apparently already scheduled to happen, the academy semester having begun 3 days prior and Xiao Lian's enrollment paperwork already processed in a covered carriage sent by the Xiao household, accompanied by 2 attendants who helped carry his trunks and said very little. The academy gates were tall and carved from white stone, and passing through them felt like crossing a threshold in more ways than the obvious one. The courtyard beyond the gate was busy. Students moved in groups, wearing the academy's gray and silver colors over their own house robes, and the sound of practice swords hitting wooden targets echoed from somewhere to the left. He walked carefully, taking everything in, cataloging faces against his memory of the story. Most of them he recognized in the vague way of background characters present, named in passing, important only when the plot required them. A few stood out sharply. Song Yu was the first one he spotted. He was standing near the fountain at the center of the main courtyard, arguing cheerfully with an attendant over the correct way to carry a stack of scrolls, his dark hair escaping its tie on one side and his robe already slightly crooked. He was 20 years old, son of a mid-ranking military family, and he was one of the few genuinely good people in the novel, warm and loyal and completely, heartbreakingly trusting, which was exactly why Xiao Lian had chosen him as a target. In the original story, Song Yu would be expelled from the academy in Chapter 12 after a stolen royal examination scroll was found in his belongings, a scroll that Xiao Lian had planted there to eliminate a person who had been getting too close to certain truths without realizing it. He had not been expelled yet. The scroll had not yet been planted. He made a note of that and kept walking. The attendants led him to his assigned dormitory room, which was on the 2nd floor of the East Residential Hall and had the same carved wood and silk aesthetic as the bedroom he had woken up in, only smaller and less elaborate. He thanked the attendants. He unpacked his trunks slowly and methodically, which gave him something to do with his hands while his mind worked through the immediate list of priorities. Protect Song Yu. Avoid giving Xiao Lian any opportunity to use him as a messenger or a signature. Learn which students were already connected to his brother's network. Do not, under any circumstances, behave in a way that made Xiao Lian start looking at him more carefully than he already did. That last one was the most delicate. Because the original Xiao Lian had been genuinely innocent, he had acted without guile because he had no guile to act with. And now there was a 22-year-old former university student sitting inside that innocent face trying to pass as someone who had no idea what was coming, and the disguise required a particular kind of stillness that he was not entirely sure he could maintain. He was still thinking about this when the afternoon sword practice session in the outer training courtyard pulled him out of his dormitory and into disaster. He had no reason to be at the training courtyard. He was not on a cultivation track. But his feet had carried him there the way feet carry a person who has read about something many times and wants, against all reason, to see it with their own eyes. He stood at the edge of the courtyard behind a wooden pillar and watched the advanced students run through drills with real blades that caught the light like scattered coins. He was so focused on watching that he did not notice the edge of his robe catch under his own foot. He pitched forward with absolutely no grace whatsoever. He did not hit the ground. A hand closed around his arm, firm, quick, sure, and arrested his fall so completely that he ended up upright instead of face first in the courtyard dirt, held steady by someone who had clearly caught falling things before and found it unremarkable. He looked up. The face above him was sharp-featured and still, with dark eyes that held the particular careful quality of someone who observed everything and reacted to very little. The jaw was set. The posture was straight even in a casual moment. The silver and gray of the academy robes sat on those shoulders like they had been made specifically for them. He knew that face too. Zhenkai. 21 years old. The hero of Crimson Throne. The person who was supposed to distrust every member of the Xiao family on sight and spend the first 40 chapters of the novel viewing them all as suspects in the conspiracy closing around the emperor. He was looking down at Xiao Lian with an expression that had not been written in any chapter of the book he remembered. It was not distrust. It was not suspicion or cold dismissal. It was something quieter and more puzzled than that, something that sat behind his eyes like a question he had not yet decided to ask aloud. "Are you all right?" Zhenkai said. His voice was low and measured, exactly as the novel had described it, and it asked the question with the same careful evenness that he seemed to bring to everything. He stood there, held upright by the hero of the story, his heart doing something completely unprofessional, and managed to produce the words, "Yes. Thank you. I'm sorry." He bowed quickly. He turned around. He walked away at a pace that was not quite running but was doing its best impression of one. He made it back to the East Residential Hall before he stopped walking and stood in the corridor with his back against the cool stone wall and thought about the look on Zhenkai's face. The one that was not in the novel. The one that felt less like the beginning of a political drama and more like the beginning of something else entirely, something quieter and more personal and, if he was being completely honest with himself, considerably more terrifying. He had come into this story planning to survive it. He had not made any plans for whatever that look meant. He pressed the back of his hand against his warm cheek and stared at the ceiling of the corridor, which was less beautiful than the bedroom ceiling but presented the same general problem, which was that it gave him nothing useful to focus on while his thoughts moved in directions he had not prepared for. Down the hall, a door opened. Song Yu's voice floated out, cheerful, unguarded, already sounding like a friend asking if anyone had seen where the tea kitchen was because he had been looking for 15 minutes and this building made no architectural sense. He straightened up. He smoothed the front of his robe. He put the softness back on his face like a familiar coat, gentle, unhurried, sweet Xiao Lian who noticed nothing and suspected no one, and he walked toward Song Yu's voice. There was work to do. There was a story to dismantle from the inside. And he had just decided, somewhere between a carved ceiling and a set of dark, puzzled eyes, that he was going to be very good at it. 3 weeks inside a story was long enough to learn its rhythms. He had figured out which corridors in the East Residential Hall caught the morning wind and made the candle flames flicker sideways, which dining hall table sat close enough to the senior students to overhear useful things without appearing to listen, and which route between the library and the music hall let him avoid the cluster of noble daughters who had decided that Xiao Lian was charming in the way that small animals were charming and wanted to feed him pastries and ask questions about his brother. He had learned the academy the way a person learns a place they intend to survive in, quietly and completely, filing every detail into the part of his mind that never stopped working even when his face was doing its best impression of someone with nothing to think about. He had also, in those 3 weeks, successfully done the thing he came to do. Song Yu's bag had been checked. The scroll had been found. The trap had been quietly dismantled before it ever had a chance to close. It had not been elegant. He had pulled Song Yu aside after their second shared meal together, when enough warmth had built between them that an odd warning would not seem entirely out of nowhere, and told him carefully that he had overheard something he could not quite repeat but that Song Yu should perhaps look through his belongings before the week was out. He had said it with the mildest possible face and the most apologetic possible tone and then promptly changed the subject to the terrible quality of the ink they were being given in calligraphy class. Song Yu had laughed, assumed it was some kind of noble house gossip he was not privy to, and checked his bag that same night. He found the scroll tucked into the inner lining, wrapped in plain cloth so it would not be immediately obvious. He brought it to the library the next morning and returned it to the reference section shelf where it belonged, and no one ever knew it had moved. The academy librarian noted no missing materials. The examination board conducted no investigation. 3 second-year students who had been connected to Xiao Ren's network and were waiting to report the scandal to the right authorities were left with nothing to report. The trap had fallen apart so quietly that it barely made a sound. Xiao Ren said nothing about it. He appeared at the academy twice in those 3 weeks officially to speak with the academy chancellor about the Xiao family's continued patronage of the arts program, unofficially to walk the grounds with his easy elegant stride and his perfect smile and his eyes that never stopped measuring everything they touched. He visited Lian both times, bringing candied hawthorn wrapped in paper and asking gentle questions about his studies, his friendships, whether the other students were treating him well. Lian smiled softly and answered everything and gave his brother nothing useful at all. He did notice the second time Xiao Ren's gaze sharpened for just a fraction of a moment when Song Yu's name came up in conversation. A person who did not know what to look for would not have caught it. Lian caught it the way he caught everything now, quietly and without reacting, tucking it away into the file he was building in the back of his mind labeled things Xiao Ren is reconsidering. His brother was smart. Possibly the smartest person in the novel, which was a significant thing to say in a story full of cultivators and political strategists and imperial advisors. The failure of the Song Yu trap would not read to him as random chance for very long. He would begin to wonder whether something in his immediate environment had changed. He would look at the variables. And eventually, because he was Xiao Ren and thinking several layers past everyone around him was simply how he operated, he would look at his little brother with new eyes. That was the clock Lian could hear ticking somewhere under everything else. He needed more time. And what he got instead was Zhen Kai. It started the morning after the courtyard incident, which he had spent a great deal of effort trying to file away under unfortunate and irrelevant. He was at the East Hall study room, sitting alone at a long table with 3 scrolls open around him in a rough semicircle, trying to cross-reference what he remembered from the novel's political subplot with the actual names and family crests now available to him in the Academy's official record texts, when the door opened and Zhen Kai walked in. He did not react. He kept his eyes on the scroll in front of him. He was very proud of this. Zhen Kai took a seat 2 tables away, opened his own materials, and did not look at him once for the entire hour they both sat there working. When Lian finally packed his scrolls and stood to leave, he glanced over by reflex and found Zhen Kai's eyes already moving back down to the page, like they had just been somewhere else. He told himself this meant nothing and went to breakfast. It happened again the next day. And the day after. Not always in the study room. Once in the outer garden where Lian went to practice the guqin alone because the music room felt too crowded and the strings rang clearer in open air. Once at the dining hall, where Zhen Kai sat 3 tables away instead of his usual seat near the window and ate without speaking to his training partners, which was unusual enough that even Song Yu noticed and made a comment. Once at the Academy's East Gate, where Lian had gone in the early evening to watch the supply carts come in because he had spotted a merchant he recognized from chapter 34 of the novel and wanted to confirm a suspicion, and where he turned around to find Zhen Kai standing 20 feet behind him with the expression of a person who had not entirely planned to be there. None of this was in the novel. In the novel, Zhen Kai and Xiao Lian had 2 scenes together before chapter 89. Both were formal. Both were brief. Both took place in the presence of other characters and involved nothing more meaningful than a polite exchange of Academy-appropriate pleasantries. The hero of Crimson Throne did not seek out the villain's little brother. He had no reason to. He had a conspiracy to unravel and an emperor to protect and a personal history of loss that made him slow to trust anyone, particularly anyone connected to a noble family he was already suspicious of. And yet here he was, appearing at increasingly regular intervals, saying very little, looking at Lian with that same quiet, questioning expression that had no name in any chapter he had ever read. On the 19th day, Lian broke first. He had not meant to. He had a plan and the plan required maintaining the appearance of sweet ordinary Xiao Lian who was too gentle and too sheltered to notice things like being quietly followed around a school campus by the story's main protagonist. But he had been up until the early hours of the morning the night before working through a particularly complicated section of his mental reconstruction of Xiao Ren's network, and he was tired in the specific way that made his patience thinner than usual, and when he turned around on the library path to find Zhen Kai falling into step beside him for the 3rd consecutive afternoon, something in him simply stopped holding the question back. "Why do you keep doing this?" he said. The words came out quieter than he intended. Not rude. Just honest, in the way that exhaustion sometimes stripped the careful coating off things. He stopped walking. Zhen Kai stopped beside him. Around them the library path was empty, the other students having already gone and out of the afternoon chill. Zhen Kai was quiet for long enough that Lian thought he might not answer. He had that quality sometimes, of sitting inside a silence without any apparent discomfort, which was either very admirable or very inconvenient depending on the context. You look like someone carrying something very heavy, Zhen Kai said finally, completely by yourself. Lian looked at him. The afternoon light came in low and gold through the tree branches above the path and settled on Zhen Kai's face in a way that made it difficult to look at directly for reasons that had nothing to do with the light. He was not trying to be poetic. He said it the same way he said everything, with a plainness that somehow made it land harder than anything ornate would have. There was a version of this moment where Lian explained everything. Where he said, I know what you are and I know what your story is supposed to be and I know what my brother is planning and I have been trying to pull the threads out of the weaving one at a time before it closes around all of us. There was a version where he trusted someone with the full impossible truth of what he was carrying. That version existed somewhere in a world where the truth was something he could afford. I'm fine, he said instead. Zhen Kai looked at him for a moment longer. Then he said very simply, okay. And he did not push. He did not offer unsolicited observations or press for more or fill the space with the kind of well-meaning persistence that Lian had been bracing for. He just accepted the answer and walked with him the rest of the way to the library door in silence, and when they reached it he held it open without being asked, and Lian went inside without looking back because looking back felt like a thing he could not afford either. He found a table in the back corner between two tall shelves and sat down and put his face in his hands for exactly 30 seconds. Then he sat up, straightened his sleeves and opened the scroll he had come for. Song Yu found him there an hour later and dropped into the seat across from him with the energy of someone who had been looking forward to this specific moment all day. I have found, Song Yu announced, setting a cloth-wrapped bundle on the table between them with ceremony, the best pork and chive dumplings in a 3-mile radius of this academy, which I know because I walked that 3-mile radius this afternoon instead of attending the second half of classical history, which I will not regret. Lian looked at the bundle. He looked at Song Yu's completely satisfied face. Something in his chest unclenched by approximately 1 degree. You skipped class for dumplings, he said. I skipped class for excellent dumplings, Song Yu corrected, unwrapping the cloth to reveal a row of golden-bottomed dumplings still steaming faintly from their paper wrapping. There is a significant distinction. Try one before you judge me. He tried one. It was genuinely extraordinary. Song Yu watched him eat it with the expression of someone who had just won an argument without having to make any of their points. He said nothing. He simply took a dumpling for himself and chewed it with profound satisfaction and let the silence between them settle into the comfortable kind, the kind that did not need to be filled. This was the thing about Song Yu that the novel had not fully captured. He was cheerful in a way that felt structural, like it was built into the foundation of him rather than performed on the surface. He made space around himself without trying to. Sitting next to him was like sitting next to a window on a cold day, close enough to feel the warmth of the light without the bite of the wind. Lian was aware, in the careful recording part of his mind, that he was becoming genuinely fond of this person. He noted this the way he noted all things that complicated his position with attention and without panic. Fond was fine. Fond was something he could work with. Fond was not the same as reckless. He told himself this with some regularity over the days that followed. Because the days that followed brought Zhen Kai into Song Yu's orbit by a route that seemed entirely accidental and was probably not. It began with a group sparring assessment where both of them ended up in the same training bracket by scheduling coincidence, continued through Song Yu deciding that Zhen Kai was fascinating in the way that difficult puzzles were fascinating and appointing himself the project of getting at least 3 consecutive words out of him, and arrived eventually at an afternoon at the small tea house just inside the academy's inner wall where Song Yu sat the 3 of them down together with the authority of someone who had decided this was happening and dared the universe to disagree. The first 20 minutes were painful. Zhen Kai sat across from Lian and said very little. Song Yu talked enough for all 3 of them and seemed to consider this a perfectly workable arrangement. Lian held his tea with both hands and watched Zhen Kai from the corner of his eye and tried to understand the thing that kept happening in his chest whenever Zhen Kai glanced at him, which was a warm and slightly inconvenient pressure that he did not have a file for yet. Then Song Yu, entirely by accident, mentioned that he had once spent 3 hours lost in a bamboo forest because he had been too proud to admit he did not know where he was going, and Zhen Kai made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was the closest thing to one Lian had ever heard from him, and the quality of the air between all 3 of them changed at once, like a door opening somewhere nearby. After that it was easier. Not easy, but easier. They met at the tea house 4 more times over the following 2 weeks. Then the meeting stopped being something that needed to be arranged and started being something that simply happened, the three of them converging at the same table in the same afternoon light by a kind of gravity that none of them remarked upon. Lian laughed at real things during those afternoons. He argued about poetry with Songyu. He watched Jin Kai listen to both of them with that steady, absorbing quality, taking everything in, and occasionally offering a single precise observation that reframed the entire conversation. He felt, in those hours, something he had not expected to feel inside this story. He felt like a person. Not a reincarnated reader managing a plot. Not the villain's disposable little brother. Not a variable in someone else's scheme. A person sitting with people he liked in a world that was fictional and was also, undeniably, real. He was still thinking about that distinction late one night when he came back to his dormitory room and found the letter on his desk. He almost did not see it at first. It was placed under his inkstone, which was where he sometimes tucked papers he wanted to return to, and in the low light of the single oil lamp it looked like one of his own notes. But when he picked it up and held it to the flame, the handwriting stopped his breath completely. It was his handwriting. Or rather, it was a copy so precise that even he, looking at it with the knowledge that he had not written it, felt the wrongness of it only in the content rather than the form. Every stroke was placed the way he placed it. Every character shaped the way he shaped it. Someone had studied his hand closely enough to reproduce it without a flaw. The letter was addressed to a rebel lord 2 provinces east of the capital. It spoke, in careful oblique language, of arrangements and timing and a signal that would come before the next full moon. It implicated him in something so serious that merely possessing it was enough to end him. He set it down on the desk very slowly. He sat in the chair very slowly. Outside his window the academy grounds were quiet, the last candles in neighboring rooms going dark one by one, and he sat in the growing dark and understood with perfect clarity what he was looking at. Xiao Lian had not abandoned his plans. He had adapted them. The Songyu trap had failed silently, and so Xiao Lian had reached for the backup. The one Lian remembered from the deep notes section of the novel's fan wiki where someone had compiled the villain's contingency strategies. If the hero could not be framed through an ally, then a family member would serve the purpose. A gentle, unguarded, trusting little brother who would never see it coming. Except that this version of Xiao Lian had seen it coming 8 chapters in advance. He sat with that knowledge for a long time. Long enough for the lamp to burn low. Long enough for the sounds of the academy to go completely quiet around him. Long enough to feel the full weight of what his brother was and to let that weight settle into him without flinching away from it. Then he stood up. He lit a new candle from the dying flame of the old one. He held the forged letter over it and watched it catch and curl and become ash on the small bronze dish he used for incense. When there was nothing left of it, he sat back down at the desk and pulled out a clean sheet of paper. Not to write to a rebel lord. Not to write anything that could be used against him. He was going to write to the Royal Investigation Bureau, anonymous and careful and precise, pointing them toward evidence he knew existed in places he knew Xiao Lian had hidden it. He had been waiting for the right moment, the moment where moving would do the most damage to the right structures and the least to the people he wanted to protect. The forged letter told him the right moment had arrived. He dipped his brush and began. He was so focused on the writing that he did not hear the knock at first. When it came again, soft and deliberate, he startled, then crossed the room and opened the door. Jin Kai stood in the corridor, slightly rumpled in a way that suggested he had been somewhere that was not bed but was also not official academy business, holding 2 ceramic cups of warm tea with the particular careful grip of a person who had carried them up 4 flights of stairs and was not going to apologize for it. "You did not eat dinner?" Jin Kai said. He looked at the cups. He looked at Jin Kai's face. He thought about the forged letter that was now ash. He thought about the real letter sitting half-finished on his desk. He thought about the particular and impossible quality of standing in a doorway at the end of the worst evening he had had in this story and being met with warm tea carried up 4 flights of stairs by someone who was supposed to be his enemy. He stepped aside and let him in. The candle on the desk burned steadily. Outside the academy slept. Aunt Xiao Lian, who was not the person this story had been written for, sat across from the hero of it in the quiet and felt, underneath the fear and the scheming and the careful performance of innocence, something that had no place in the plot of Crimson Throne but was growing in him anyway, patient and persistent and entirely its own. He had not made any plans for this either. He suspected, looking at Jin Kai's steady face across the warm circle of candlelight, that he was going to need to. Morning came to the Royal Academy the way it always did, indifferent to the things that had shifted in the dark. The white plum trees in the courtyard below caught the first light and held it in their branches like cupped water, and the bells in the spine tower rang 6 times across the rooftops, and students in gray and silver began moving through the corridors with their scrolls and their training gear and their ordinary morning concerns, completely unaware that somewhere in a small room on the second floor of the East Residential Hall, a boy who had come from another world entirely had spent the hours between midnight and dawn making the most important decision of his life inside this one. Zhen Kai had stayed for 2 hours the night before. They had not spoken about anything of consequence. That was the remarkable thing about it, the thing Lian kept returning to as he sat at his desk in the early morning with the half-finished letter still in front of him and the ceramic cup from the night before still sitting at the corner of the table where Zhen Kai had set it. They had talked about small things. Song Yu's increasingly ambitious schemes to improve the tea house menu by personally lobbying the kitchen staff. The particular frustration of a classical poetry form that required the last character of every line to carry 3 simultaneous meanings. The way the Academy's East Garden looked completely different depending on whether you entered it from the north or south gate. Nothing that mattered. Everything that did. Because what Lian understood, sitting in that room in the candlelight with someone who had carried tea up 4 flights of stairs for a person he had no obligation to think about, was that the loneliness he had been managing so carefully since waking up in this story was heavier than he had admitted to himself. He had told himself it was fine. He had told himself that the careful distance he kept from everyone was strategy, which it was, but it was also the only thing he knew how to do in a world where the truth of what he was made genuine closeness feel like standing on ice he could not trust. Zhen Kai had not asked for the truth. He had just sat across from him and been present in the unhurried, uncomplicated way that was apparently simply how he existed. And something in Lian had unclenched that had been wound tight since the morning he opened his eyes to a carved ceiling and understood where he was. He picked up his brush. He finished the letter. It took him another hour to get it right. The language had to be precise without being traceable. The locations he named had to be specific enough to be useful and attributed in a way that pointed clearly toward the evidence without pointing toward him. He knew exactly where Xiao Lian kept his most critical materials because he had read the chapter where Zhen Kai found them in the original story, Chapter 61, where the hero broke through the hidden panel behind the third shelf of the Xiao family's private academy study room and pulled out a lacquered box containing coded correspondence, duplicate seals from 3 different noble houses, and a ledger of payments made to officials whose names appeared nowhere in the official record of Xiao Ren's acquaintances. In the original story, it had taken Zhen Kai 40 chapters of dangerous investigation to find that room and that box. Lian told the bureau exactly where to look in 2 pages of careful, anonymous script. He sealed the letter with plain wax and no crest. He left it in the collection slot of the Academy's outgoing correspondence office before the morning attendant arrived to sort the day's post, tucked between 2 official student examination requests so it would not stand out in either direction. Then he went to breakfast and ate congee with Song Yu and talked about nothing, and the day continued. The bureau moved faster than he expected. He had estimated a week, maybe 10 days, before the anonymous information was verified and cross-referenced enough to justify action. What he got was 5 days, which told him that either the bureau already had threads of its own running toward the same conclusions, or the specific precision of what he had provided was unusual enough to accelerate their timeline considerably. He suspected both. On the 5th day after the letter, 2 senior bureau investigators arrived at the academy under the cover of an official academic review inspection, carrying the kind of documentation that gave them access to all private study spaces on campus without requiring notification. They spent the afternoon in the senior faculty wing. They spent the evening, by his careful observation through a window that faced the right direction, in the building that housed the academy's private noble study rooms. He did not watch what happened next. He went to the East Garden and played his guqin until the light failed, and the music came out cleaner than it usually did because his hands were steadier than they had any right to be. He heard the results through the academy the way everyone else did, in pieces and fragments, and the particular hush that falls over a population when something significant has happened that no one is yet sure they are allowed to discuss openly. 4 members of a senior cultivation track had been taken in for questioning by bureau officials. Their names were not announced. Their connection to a particular noble family was not stated. But in a place as small and socially intricate as the Royal Academy, where everyone knew everyone else's house affiliation and training mentor and weekly schedule, the associations were apparent within hours. Xiao Ren's network had a visible crack running through it. Not a collapse, not yet, but a fracture that could be seen by anyone who knew where to look. Song Yu appeared at Lian's door that evening with a very significant expression and a container of red bean soup. Something happened, Song Yu said, sitting on the edge of Lian's desk chair with his knees pulled up. With the bureau inspection. I heard, Lian said mildly, sitting on the bed with the soup warming his palms. Song Yu looked at him for a long moment. He had perceptive eyes, underneath all the cheerfulness, and they were doing something very focused right now. You know, sometimes I get the feeling that you know things before they happen, he said. And then I think that is a completely unreasonable thing to believe about a person, and then something happens and I get the feeling again. Lian sipped his soup. Red bean, he said. You remembered I like this. Do not change the subject with soup, Song Yu said, but his mouth curved upward at the corners, the suspicion softening into something fond instead. I'm not going to ask. I just want you to know that I notice. And that whatever you're doing, I'm on your side. The words landed quietly and settled there, and Lian looked at the person across from him, 20 years old and warm and loyal and so much more than the 5 chapters the novel had given him, and felt something move in his chest that was not strategy and was not management and was simply gratitude, real and uncomplicated. I know, he said. 3 days after that, Xiao Lian came to the academy. This visit was different from the previous ones. He did not arrive with the easy stride of a patron come to oversee his family's investment. He arrived in a closed carriage with no house crest visible on the door, attended by fewer people than usual, and went directly to the chancellor's office rather than walking the grounds first. The visit lasted 40 minutes. When he emerged, his face was exactly as composed and pleasant as it always was, and only someone who had been studying that face for weeks with the specific intention of seeing past it would have noticed the particular quality of stillness it now held, the kind that was not natural calm but constructed calm, the kind that takes effort. He sent for Lian. A brief note, delivered by one of the study attendants, asking his little brother to meet him in the private family study room before the afternoon bells. Lian read the note twice. He set it down. He went to the window and looked at the courtyard below for a moment, at the students crossing it in pairs and small groups, at the white plum trees that had started to drop their blossoms in the warming days so that the ground beneath them was scattered with soft white. He thought about a character in a novel who had walked trustingly into that same room in chapter 89 and not walked back out. Then he straightened his robe, arranged his face into the expression that had kept him safe for weeks, and went. The private family study room was on the 3rd floor of the senior building, accessed by a corridor that most students had no reason to use. It smelled like cedarwood and ink and the faint particular scent of his brother's preferred incense, which in another life might have been a comfort. Xiao Lian was standing at the window when Lian arrived, backlit by afternoon light, and he turned when the door opened with that smile already in place, the one that had never once reached the precise center of his eyes. Little Lian, he said. The voice was warm. It was always warm. Come sit. Lian sat at the low table. Xiao Lian sat across from him and poured tea from the pot already waiting there, setting a cup in front of Lian with the careful attentiveness of someone who wanted to appear to have thought of everything. I have been hearing strange things, Xiao Lian said pleasantly, about bureau inspectors at the academy. It seems some of the senior students have attracted an unfortunate degree of official interest. I heard something similar, Lian said. It is a troubling thing, Xiao Lian continued, watching the steam rise from his cup, when people one has invested trust in fail to conduct themselves carefully enough to avoid notice. He said it with the mild regret of someone discussing a disappointment entirely unrelated to himself, and the performance was so clean and so complete that Lian understood why the people around his brother never saw what was underneath until it was too late. He reached across the table and pushed Lian's hair back from his forehead, the same gesture from their childhood, the one that had always meant I am looking after you, the one that in a different timeline had made Xiao Lian smile back and believe it entirely. You know, Xiao Lian said softly, that I have always kept you safe, that everything I have done has been with our family's future in mind. You do know that, don't you? The room was very quiet. Outside, somewhere below, the academy continued its ordinary afternoon. Lian felt the full gravity of the moment pressing down on him, the weight of a story trying to run along its original track, pulling at the edges of things the way a current pulls at whatever falls into it. He looked at his brother's beautiful face. He thought about the forged letter written in his handwriting. He thought about Song Yu's bag and the scroll tucked into the lining. He thought about every piece of the novel he had read and every piece of the real world he had built inside it, the tea house afternoons and the dumpling wrappers and the candlelight and the ceramic cups still sitting on the corner of his desk. I know, he said. Just that. Nothing else. 2 words with nothing behind them that his brother could use, and nothing in front of them that gave away how much he understood. Xiao Lian's smile held for exactly 1 breath after that, and then something behind it flickered, barely visible, like a candle in a jar seeing wine through the glass. He knew. Not the full shape of it, not yet, But he knew that the thing sitting across from him was not the same soft, unguarded little brother he had last measured and found unthreatening. Something had changed in this room, in this conversation, in this visit, and Xiao Rin was intelligent enough to feel the edge of it even without being able to name it. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Then Lian set down his cup, bowed with perfect courtesy, said that he had a music practice session he did not want to be late for, and walked out of the room. He did not look back. He did not run. He walked down the corridor at an unhurried pace that told anyone watching him exactly nothing, and when he reached the staircase and descended out of sight he let out one slow breath through his nose and continued walking. The next 7 days dismantled 6 months of careful architecture. The Bureau's findings from the study room, combined with the additional documentation that the original tip had pointed them toward in the wider capital network, moved the investigation from a campus matter into a formal imperial inquiry. The 4 students taken for questioning became 12. The coded correspondence found in the lacquered box behind the 3rd shelf was turned over to imperial archivists who spent 4 days establishing the authenticity of the seals and the ledger entries. 3 officials in the capital's Eastern Administrative District received formal notices that their financial records were under review. Xiao Rin himself was not arrested. He was too careful, too layered, too many steps removed from the most visible pieces of the evidence for anything to land on him directly yet. But he was placed under a formal watch, which in the language of imperial procedure meant that every movement he made, every letter he sent, every person he met with was now being observed by people whose job was to be very patient and very thorough. The elaborate scheme that was supposed to have placed him in shadow control of the imperial court was not destroyed, but it was stopped, suspended mid-construction like a building whose foundation had been quietly removed. He would spend years untangling himself from it. Years watched and constrained and unable to move freely in the spaces he had built for himself. For a person like Xiao Rin, who operated entirely through freedom of movement and the cultivation of unseen influence, it was not a prison, but it was the closest thing to one that left no visible bars. It was not a kind ending. Lian had not designed it to be kind. He had designed it to be true, which was something different and considerably harder. Song Yu found him on the academy rooftop on the evening after the last of the capital officials received their notices, which was information Song Yu had through his family's military connections and shared with Lian in the manner of someone putting 2 and 2 together and arriving at a number he had suspected for some time. They sat side by side on the low wall at the roof's edge with a paper bag of sweet dumplings between them and watched the sun move toward the western rooftops and said very little for a while. "I always knew something was wrong," Song Yu said finally, not as an accusation, as a statement placed carefully between them for examination. "I just didn't know the shape of it." "Most people don't," Lian said, "until the shape reveals itself." Song Yu was quiet for a moment, eating a dumpling with the focused appreciation of someone who understood that food was one of the few reliable pleasures in a complicated world. Then he said, "You knew more than you ever told me." "Yes," Lian said. "And you used what you knew to keep me from getting expelled and dishonored and sent home in pieces. You would have figured it out eventually." "Maybe," Song Yu said. "Eventually is a very long time when it's your family's name on the line." He looked at Lian sideways, and his eyes were warm and steady and completely without resentment. "Thank you. In case I haven't said it. Which I haven't, because I didn't know what I was thanking you for. But I'm saying it now." Lian looked at the bag of dumplings. He thought about the version of this story where Song Yu went home in pieces and never knew why. He thought about how easy it would have been, how completely the original plot had counted on that outcome, on the soft little brother not knowing enough to prevent it. "You brought me cake on my 3rd day here," Lian said. "When I didn't know anyone and the dormitory smelled like cedarwood and I was sitting in my room trying very hard not to be frightened." Song Yu blinked. Then he laughed, sudden and genuine and loud in the quiet evening air. "I did. I thought you looked like someone who needed cake." "You were correct," Lian said. Song Yu was still laughing when the rooftop door opened. Zhen Kai appeared at the top of the stairs looking slightly windblown, his dark hair loose from whatever tie it had started the day in, his training robe exchanged for the plain gray of the academy's informal wear. He stopped when he saw them, and his eyes went to Lian the way they always did, that same quiet magnetic pull that still had no proper name in any chapter Lian had read. Song Yu stood up. He brushed dumpling crumbs off his robe with enormous dignity, announced to no one in particular that he had just remembered something extremely important on the other side of the campus, tucked the paper bag under his arm, and descended the stairs with the energy of someone who had been waiting to make this particular exit for several days and was very pleased with its execution. The rooftop was quiet. Zhen Kai crossed it and sat down where Song Yu had been, close enough that the warmth of him was present even in the cool evening air, and for a moment neither of them said anything. The sun was finishing its descent, the sky going from gold to deep rose above the academy rooftops, and the white plum trees below were dark shapes in the growing dusk. "It was you," Jinkai said. Not a question. The same quality he always brought to certainty, plain and unhurried, like a stone set down on a table rather than thrown. The bureau tip. Someone gave them information that would have taken an investigation months to find on its own. Someone who knew things they had no ordinary way of knowing. Lian looked at his hands in his lap. The slender, pretty hands that still sometimes felt borrowed, though less so than they had in the beginning. Would it change anything? He asked. If it was. It would mean, Zhen Kai said, choosing his words the way he chose everything with deliberate care, that the same person who has been quietly standing between people they care about and harm, using nothing but their own knowledge and their own nerve, has been doing it entirely alone. And it would mean I spent 2 months being too slow to say what I should have said considerably earlier. Lian turned to look at him. The last of the sunlight was leaving the rooftop and Zhen Kai's face in the evening shadow was the most open Lian had ever seen it, stripped of the careful neutral expression that was his public face the way Lian's gentle sweetness was his. What was underneath was not soft exactly. It was earnest, which was rarer and more difficult. You don't have to carry things alone, Zhen Kai said. You don't have to manage everything from the inside of a performance. Not with me. The words settled into the air between them and stayed there. He thought about the novel he had loved in another life. The cold hero and the disposable little brother and the story that had never once asked what would happen if those two people were given the space to actually see each other. He thought about the original Xiao Lian, the one who never got a real scene, who walked quietly and trustingly to an ending that was not an ending so much as an erasure. He thought about everything he had done to make sure that character got to be a person instead. He thought about warm tea carried up 4 flights of stairs. About a scarf returned at a fountain at night. About a voice asking "Are you all right?" in a way that meant something more than the words. Zhen Kai reached over slowly, telegraphing every inch of the movement the way someone does when they want to make absolutely certain the other person has every opportunity to pull back, and took Lian's hand in his. His grip was steady and warm and said everything that neither of them had found the exact words for yet. The sky above the academy finished its shift from rose to deep violet and the first stars appeared, faint and distant and entirely indifferent to the specific weight of what was happening on a rooftop below them, which was the ending of one story and the beginning of another. Xiao Lian, who had died on a rain-slicked road at 22 and woken up in the pages of a novel he had loved, who had spent weeks pretending to be ordinary while quietly taking apart every trap laid for the people around him, who had chosen every morning to be something more than the plot had written for him, held on. He had rewritten the villain's plan. He had protected the people who deserved protecting. He had stood inside his brother's careful architecture and pulled the right threads until the whole construction trembled and stopped. And now, in the quiet of a rooftop at the end of a very long day, he was doing the most surprising thing he had managed since arriving in this world, which was simply letting something good exist without immediately planning around it. The original story of Crimson Throne ended with schemes and heartbreak and a hero who never trusted anyone enough to let them close. It ended with a soft little brother who vanished from the pages without a name in the final chapter. This version ended on a rooftop, with stars coming out. With a hand held in the dark by someone who had followed him through corridors and carried him tea and waited, patiently and without demand, until he was ready to stop carrying everything alone. Some stories are written for you. Some stories you have to choose word by word, scene by scene, ending by ending. He had chosen every word of this one. And it was, in every way that mattered, exactly enough. If this story found you at the right moment, if it made you feel something real between these pages, share it with someone who loves a good BL romance where the soft one turns out to be the most powerful person in the room. Leave a comment telling the world which character stole your heart first. Come back for the next story because this world has more endings worth choosing, and every single one of them is waiting to be written.